Hey there, everybody, and welcome to this video on listening without defensiveness. I'm your host, Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. In this video, we're going to explore what causes defensiveness in communications and, guess what, identify strategies to enhance assertiveness and reduce defensiveness. So let's start at the beginning. It's important to remember when you feel defensive, there's a meaning behind it. All behavior, all feelings have meaning. Now remember, feelings are not facts, but they are one aspect of information that your brain uses to help keep you safe. Defensiveness is a behavior or a feeling that indicates a lack of a sense of safety. So think about times when you've gotten defensive. What was going on that made you feel unsafe in some way? Prior learning of unsafeness in relationships is one of the biggest causes. Verbal or physical aggression from other people, feeling invalidated or disrespected, all of those things can contribute to a sense of defensiveness. If you have a low self-esteem and someone is providing feedback, no matter how helpful and constructive and gently they're trying to provide it, you may start feeling defensive because you start fearing rejection. So these are all things that we need to consider in assessing why a particular person feels defensive and reacts defensively in certain situations. Another thing that can cause defensiveness is discussing triggering material. If you start discussing a trauma somebody's had or something that's triggering to them that makes them feel unsafe and powerless, then they may start getting defensive and saying, this is my way. I don't want to hear what you have to say, my way or the highway, if you will. Remember that defensiveness is a type of aggression that says my thoughts and feelings matter and yours don't. Or it could be saying this makes me feel really uncomfortable, really powerless, and I refuse to hear you. I can't go there because when I feel powerless, it reminds me of other times I felt powerless and the outcome wasn't so good. So the first thing that is important in listening without defensiveness is to create safety. You cannot hear and interpret what's going on if your stress response, your HPA axis, is in full bore. If you are feeling unsafe or powerless, then your brain is telling you fight or flee, fight or flee, fight or flee. It's not in processing mode. It's not into hearing mode. It's into I feel afraid, I feel threatened, therefore I want to get the heck out of Dodge. And I don't know where Dodge is or where that comment came from, but it's what we say around here a lot in the South. Anyhow, I digress. So you do need to recognize that when you are in your emotional mind, not your wise mind, it's going to be difficult to hear what's being said and understand what's being said from an objective point of view. You're going to be hearing it from a critical or threatening voice, if you will. So let's start out. Recognize the difference between criticism of you versus your behaviors. You are lovable. You are a good person. Your behaviors may not always be. And it's important whether you're getting feedback from a boss or a friend or somebody else to separate the difference. Just because this person disagrees with my opinions, just because this person doesn't like the behavior that I did, doesn't mean they're saying I'm a bad person. It means they're saying they disagree with how I handled something. Okay. Number 2, take what's useful and leave the rest. Some people, and we're going to talk about boundaries in a few minutes, but some people may criticize you as a person because that's how they were raised. They don't know the difference between separating actions from people. So they criticize you. They may think or say things like you're stupid or you're ignorant or something. Okay, Well, that's on them. Take what's useful and leave the rest. So if they say you're ignorant, which means you don't have the information that you need, all right, think to yourself, is that accurate? Do I not have the information that I need? If so, okay, go find some information, educate yourself. If not, leave it. You don't always have to agree on things. And if somebody is going to be aggressive in their communication, if they are going to shame you, then it's important to consider whether that's a safe person anyway. Number 3, be realistic. Nobody is liked by everybody, and nobody's behaviors are liked by everybody all the time. It's just the way the world works. None of us is perfect, so we're going to do things that we may feel guilty about. We may get angry with ourselves about. We may do things that other people are going to get angry about. Our behaviors is what they're angry about. And recognizing that, okay, that's fine. But also recognizing that if somebody doesn't like you, okay, and it's going to happen. There are people out there who they have their own stuff, and you bring out their stuff. Whether you remind them of somebody from high school or the neighbor down the street or their in-laws or whatever, you remind them of somebody that they don't like or they don't like being around. So they project those feelings onto you, and they're not going to like you. Maybe you have something they want. They feel envious and insecure, so they're not going to like you. Okay, that's on them. That has nothing to do with your goodness, your likability, your safety as a person. If they don't like you, that's their choice, and you can't change that. Therefore, it's important to nurture multiple sources of support. If you've got people in your life who don't like you, and chances are at work, you probably have 1 or 2 people who don't like you, maybe in your neighborhood too. But when we're at work, we're kind of thrust together with a bunch of people who we don't choose on our own. And when you put that many different people together, there's bound to be some stuff that is just kind of in the air. But it's important to recognize, okay, Jane over here in this office doesn't like me. She doesn't like working with me. I'm not sure why. Number 1, is it worth my energy to address? Maybe, may not be. Jane may not even realize why she doesn't like you, but that's okay. You're not her therapist. It's important to recognize, all right, if I have to interact with Jane, she doesn't like me. How can I do it in a way that I feel safe, that I feel empowered? How can I do it in a way that's respectful to both of us? Along with that, nurturing other sources of support in the office or at home and say, I've got to go do this thing. I've got to be on this team with Jane or whatever. And we don't get along very well. So having somebody that you can talk with about the interactions, talk with about how you feel about what's going on, can be really helpful in helping you separate what Jane is saying from what is actually happening, separating what Jane dislikes from who you are as a person. She may have completely incorrect perceptions about who you are as a person, but that's not your stuff. That's her stuff. Set and maintain boundaries. I told you we would get there. Boundaries help keep you safe, like the walls of a house. Physical boundaries. That's how close somebody gets to you, whether they touch you, how much eye contact they're making, those sorts of things. If someone is violating your physical boundaries, they may not realize that they are doing it. Cultures differ a lot on how close people stand when they talk, about what's appropriate touch, about what's appropriate in terms of amount of eye contact. So it's important to recognize that someone may inadvertently violate your boundaries, and they don't mean to. They don't mean to make you feel unsafe. So it's important to let them know, hey, That makes me uncomfortable when you hug me, when you come up and touch me on the back all the time, whatever it is. Before assuming, when they do it, you may tense up and feel like you're starting to get defensive. And before going down that path, it's important to check and say, do they know that this makes me uncomfortable? Do they know that I perceive this as threatening? It's a lot of assumptions. Unless you've told them before, they may not realize. Interpersonal boundaries. Those are those are the boundaries that relate to who you can and cannot be friends with, who you can and cannot agree with. Emotional boundaries, how you feel. How you feel, how you react is based on your experiences, based on your history, and based on your perceptions of the present. Feelings are not facts, so you may feel threatened when somebody didn't mean to make you feel threatened. They didn't realize it, they didn't mean to, but you felt it anyway. It doesn't mean that your feeling was wrong. It's not their place to tell you, well, that was silly to feel uncomfortable during that. No, you felt how you felt, and that was valid. Likewise, if they feel a certain way, their feelings are based on their prior experiences, and we need to respect that and not try to change them. We just need to say, okay, you don't like me or you don't like this behavior. Let's look at, how we can set effective, safe boundaries so you don't feel threatened and I don't feel threatened. Cognitive boundaries, very similar to emotional boundaries, but these are people's thoughts. And it's important to recognize, especially in today's world, people have very diverse thoughts, very, very strongly held and diverse opinions. And that's okay. What's important to recognize is everybody has their right, just like you have a right to your own opinion. Everybody around you has a right to their opinion. Now, it's one of those things bears repeating. Everybody has a right to their opinion, even if you think it's wrong, even if you vehemently disagree. Well, that's your stuff. They have a right to their opinion and to their thoughts. And when we feel like somebody's telling us that we are wrong, when we feel invalidated, when we feel like they're telling us that we are stupid, then that starts to trigger defensiveness in us. So it's important to be able to step back and say, all right, this person has a completely different take on this situation than I do. It's not my job to change their mind. It's my job to hear them. And if they have good points, maybe they have information that I don't have. Hear it, listen to it, take what's useful, leave the rest. And then environmental boundaries. Those are the sights, smells, sounds stuff. And when people start messing around in your environment, it can feel stressful. So if you're at work, for example, and somebody comes into your office and just starts picking up the pictures that you have on your desk and looking at them and asking questions and picking up knickknacks you have on your desk, that can feel very intrusive. And that can cause you to start feeling defensive right away. And once you start feeling defensive, once you get into that fight or flight framework, then it's harder to get back into your wise mind and refocus on the task at hand. Enhance your self-esteem. If you don't believe that everybody in the world needs to like you all the time, then it's easier to cope with it when somebody disagrees with you, when somebody doesn't share the same emotions, doesn't share the same thoughts, or maybe they just flat don't like you. And that's okay. If you've got a good self-esteem, you can say, their loss. I respect their right to not like me. And finally, give the respect you get. You don't want other people trying to change your mind and invade your boundaries. You don't want other people trying to tell you how to feel or what to do in particular situations unless you ask. So give the respect that you expect to get. Try to be empathetic and curious. I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again because it's such an area of conflict among people. If you passionately disagree about something, okay, recognize it as a difference and then get curious. Where are they getting their information? What's informing their decisions? What's informing yours? Is it possible, or maybe even likely, that neither one of you has the full picture? We know that in many cases, when people are presenting something, whether it's in the media or interpersonally, they present the version that is going to support their beliefs, that's going to support their self-image, that's going to make them look good. So recognizing that there's your side, there's their side, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. So be curious. What's informing their decisions? What's informing yours? Do you need to increase your knowledge about things or not? And then you can decide where to go from there. You don't need to feel defensive if you are stepping back and going, okay, is there something here that I want to use my energy to address? And this can be anything, of course, politics, religion, healthcare, those are real hot button topics. But even things like quality time. That's one of those love languages, but there are huge disagreements between partners, couples, significant others, about what quality time is. What does that mean to you? And what it means to one partner may not mean the same thing to the other partner. Very often it doesn't. And communicating about that. So when Jane wants to spend quality time with John in a way that he understands it, in the way that he receives or interprets quality time, then they're going to do this. But when John wants to spend quality time with Jane, when he wants Jane to feel like, hey, I'm getting quality time right now, then they're going to do something different. And that's okay. That's respecting that boundary. You both want to have quality time together, but you define it differently. You experience it differently. When you get into a conversation with somebody and you start feeling defensive, explore alternate explanations why they might be being critical or short with you. If you've ever worked in customer service, you know that it can get exhausting for people. And customers, when they go to the customer service desk, don't stop and think, hey, I wonder whether this person's been having a good day so far, or whether they've had just the worst day of their life. The customer comes to the customer service desk and is very self-centered and self-aware and says, I have a problem and I need you to fix it. And the person on the other side of the desk may be going, I don't have any more to give, or I feel like you're asking me to do something that I cannot do. I don't have the power to do. You're the 17th person today who's asked me to do something that I just can't do. Sorry. And I know that you're going to get angry. No. So there are a lot of assumptions on both sides of the aisle, if you will. So stepping back and exploring, if somebody was short with you, what else might be going on that caused them to feel defensive, depressed, angry, irritable, whatever word you want to use. Consider where the information came from. If somebody is talking to you like your boss or maybe even your best friend, is it well-meaning constructive feedback or is it destructive feedback? Is it something meant to help build you up, or is it sort of a backhanded way of insulting you and trying to bring you down and feel inferior? There's a mnemonic, think, that I refer to a lot here. And well-meaning constructive feedback is good, but it's not always necessary. And think stands for, is what you're getting ready to say or what you want to offer, is it truthful? Okay, if you say no, then stop right there. Could it be helpful? If you say no, then stop right there. Are you able to say it in a way that's inspirational? Well, that's important to keep people from feeling defensive. If you're telling them you're a screw up and you need to do this so you can be accepted by somebody somewhere, well, that's not inspirational. If you say you have done so much growth and one of the areas that I see that you're still struggling is over here, and I'm wondering how I could support you. Well, that's so much different. So truthful, helpful, inspirational. N is the big one. Is it necessary? And sometimes things might be truthful, helpful, and you can even say them inspirationally, but they're not necessary. Somebody's doing something differently than you do, but they're getting the job done. Do you need to put your 2 cents in? That's only something only you can answer. And K stands for kind. Are you saying it not only inspirationally, but in a kind way? Are you being compassionate? Are you saying it to them in a way that you would want them to talk to you? So exploring feedback. And a lot of times it's easier to explore feedback after the conversation's over. Step back and take a look at it and say, okay, was this person trying to be helpful and constructive, or were they being destructive? When you're in the moment, you can ask yourself, if you're talking with your supervisor and they're giving you feedback for your annual performance review, well, they've got to give you some kind of feedback. That's just what they've got to do. And listen for the little bits of information that are constructive. Not all supervisors are good at giving constructive feedback. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to be a walk in the park. But listen for things that, hey, you're right, I could do a little bit better here. And maybe leave the rest. And projection is another issue when you're getting feedback from somebody. If what they're saying reminds you of how your fill in the blank used to talk to you. I know one of the words that is one of my trigger words is clutter. My mother used to constantly talk about how I had clutter in my room, clutter in my house, and clutter. And obviously it's triggering to me. So whenever I hear somebody talking about clutter, even if it doesn't have to do with me, I can feel myself starting to get defensive, and I need to back off and take a breath, get grounded, and recognize I'm projecting my feelings from the past onto this situation right now. And we're still on creating safety here. Evaluate your beliefs about what it means to be wrong, to make a mistake, or to not be liked. A lot of us use cognitive distortions here. We have to be right all the time. We cannot make a mistake. We have to be liked by everybody all the time. Those are cognitive errors. Those are thinking errors, and those are unattainable. Nobody's going to be perfect. Nobody's going to be right all the time, and nobody's going to be liked by everybody all the time. Think back and try to identify at least 10 times that you've gotten defensive, maybe even over the last week. What was it about? Then thinking, why was it that you felt threatened in that situation? Was that person being aggressive, or was it reminding you of something? Or were you assuming that in the back of their head they were saying, you're worthless? Did they say you were worthless, or were they providing constructive feedback and you interpreted it? You assumed, you engaged in mind reading. So that's really important. Were you actually threatened in the present, or were you projecting from the past? Was this person being aggressive, or were you remembering a time that was similar, or somebody said something similar to you that felt very unsafe? And then review those 10 times and see if there are any themes. For example, maybe you tend to get more defensive when you feel like somebody is disrespecting you. Okay, Well, let's take a look at what that means. Number one, were they actually disrespecting you, or were they disagreeing? Were they stating their perspective, their feelings, their opinions? And the disrespect happens when you cross that boundary and say, you should feel this way, you should agree with me. And even if the person was saying, this is the right way to believe and your way is wrong, do they understand that they are being disrespectful? Are they intending to be disrespectful? Or are they trying to be helpful and they are just being aggressive about it? You're going to handle it a little bit differently if the person has good intentions but bad delivery. So let's talk about some general tips. Set ground rules. Physical, emotional, cognitive, and environmental boundaries. When we're talking, don't get in my space. Don't stand up and tower over me. What things do people do that make you feel defensive physically when you're having a conversation about something? It could be that laser glare that they give you, or it could be that they get too close. Most of the time, it's somebody getting up. As they start to get upset, then they stand up. And that is a power position when you're sitting and they're standing. So setting those ground rules ahead of time. I'll give you a little tip here. Sometimes it's easier to avoid that because when people start getting stressed, they want to move. They want to fight or flee. So if you start the discussion or you have this discussion while you're walking, then it can be easier. That's not always practical, but it can be easier because you're not staring eye to eye at each other and you're not adjusting your power position when you start to feel anxious. Emotional ground rules. Make sure both people know that they have their right to their own emotions. You have your right to your feelings. I have my right to mine. And that everybody in the conversation deserves to have their feelings and their thoughts respected. And then environmental boundaries, don't be following me, for example. And that could be physical, but don't be following me. If I get up and I say I need to take a time out, don't follow me into the next room or sit there and bang on the door saying, we're not finished with this discussion yet. Having those boundaries is really important so people feel safe. Stop mind reading. And this is really important to not jump to conclusions and assume that you know what they are going to say. Stop projecting. And it isn't something you can just say, oh, great point, Doc Snipes. I'm not going to do that anymore. It takes time. It takes practice, but it's important to review when you start getting upset, when you start feeling defensive, and ask yourself, am I mind reading? Am I projecting? One person and one thing at a time. And this is one of the skills that we're often not taught. But people feel a lot more vulnerable if you have a beef with them and you come at them with an entire list of done me wrongs. It's like, you don't think I can do anything right. And it may feel like that in the moment. Probably not what they're saying, but it may feel like that in the moment. So it's important to focus. Sit with the person one-on-one, and the person who has the issue or who has the feedback to provide has the opportunity to talk, and they address one thing at a time. This is what I need to provide feedback about. Once that's solved, then you can move on to the next thing, and you're going to take turns. Use objective language, not you're lazy or you're stupid or you make me feel afraid all the time or you make me feel bad about myself. Okay, that is descriptive. I get that, but it doesn't tell the person that you're talking to what they need to do differently. If I say you're lazy, then the person that hears that is going, well, what makes you think that? What should I do differently? What could I do differently? If I say, you make me feel bad about myself, the person may be going, how? What is it that I'm doing? What would you like me to do differently? So we need to use objective language. And I'll give some examples of that in a minute. Have a safe word and a de-escalation plan that you can use if you feel like you're starting to get defensive or being attacked. And I do mean cognitively attacked. Obviously, if you're physically unsafe, you need to get the heck out of there. But this can even be if you're in a restaurant and the server is having a really bad day and gets short with you, and you start to feel defensive. Your significant other sees that you're starting to tense up. They can help you implement this de-escalation plan if they know what it is. They can say the safe word and let you know that, hey, it seems like you're starting to get upset. Or you can say the safe word, I need you to handle this now. Just hand off the baton because you feel like you're starting to spiral up, and that's not a good place for you to be. Likewise, having the safe word and plan with your significant others can also be helpful when you have disagreements with them. So they know, hey, when I need to take a time out, I need to take a time out. I'm feeling out of control. I'm feeling threatened, unsafe, powerless, whatever word or words you want to use. And when I'm like this, I cannot hear you. I cannot process information when I'm in fight or flee. Okay, I said it earlier. I'm going to say it again. You cannot effectively process information, cognitive information, when you're in fight or flee. So you need to take a break. You need to get regrounded. The other person, if you just walk away, may feel very vulnerable, may feel out of control themselves. And they're like, well, is the person coming back? What's going to happen? So part of this plan is I need to take a time out. I need 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, however long it takes you to get regrounded. Let them know in 30 minutes we can get back together and resume this conversation, but I need to take a break so I can actually hear what you're saying and participate in the discussion. Mindset. When you're going to talk to people, and sometimes it is you're going into something that you expect to be conflictual, whether it's a discussion. When somebody calls you and says, hey, we need to talk. Those are words that I don't think anybody wants to hear. Or when you get called into your boss's office for your evaluations. When you get ready for that conversation, go in with a mindset of listening to hear and understand. I'm going to listen to what this person has to say, to hear the information they're trying to give me and understand what they are saying, not understand what I'm assuming, not hear what I'm expecting to hear, but hear what their words are actually saying and what they're trying to communicate. Wow, that's a big one. In American culture, I'm not as familiar with other cultures, but in American culture, people are often very bad about doing this. They go into conversations with pre-existing expectations. And when they start talking to somebody, they say what they want to say. And then while the other person's talking, they start formulating their response before their partner has even had a chance to get halfway through their statement. So that really sets you up for miscommunication, for not hearing, for not completely understanding what's being said. It's important when you're talking to people, when they're talking, let them talk until they're at a resting point, not interrupting them, not jumping to conclusions, not finishing their sentences, listening to hear what they have to say and understand. Now, occasionally you may have to say, okay, let me stop you right there and let me kind of make sure I understand where we're going with this. Because some people will talk and talk and talk. And that's okay. They have a lot they want to get off their chest. But it's important that you know that you're hearing what they're meaning and you're understanding what's going on. And that helps keep you focused. Take a moment to get grounded and reflect to see if you feel your stress level rising. If you're in this conversation and you start to feel your stress level rising, okay, recognize it and then decide what you're going to do. Validate the other person's experience and thoughts as theirs. You have this opinion, okay? I don't disagree, or I'm sorry, I don't agree, but that is your right to have that thought. I'm not going to get angry because you don't agree with me. I am maybe going to be curious how you could come to that conclusion when this other conclusion over here seems so plainly obvious, but I am not going to get angry at you for your feelings or your thoughts. If you start to feel defensive, engage your plan. Take a break. Ask the person, as I said earlier, ask the person to stop so you can summarize what you're hearing. Especially in those with people who tend to say a lot. You may start hearing what you are expecting to hear once you start feeling triggered. Once you start feeling unsafe, you start looking for reasons to support your unsafeness. That's just the way your brain works. When you're out in the woods and you're walking along at night and you're enjoying yourself, it's great. You don't feel threatened. But as soon as you hear some coyote off in the woods or something, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not as safe as I think I am. And then all of a sudden, all the noises that you hear seem to become more prominent and evident. They were there before. You just didn't notice them because you weren't hypervigilant. When you're grounded, summarize and see if what you heard was accurate. If the person says yes, then formulate a response using those objective I statements. You can say something like, I feel like my thoughts, feelings, or experiences are being invalidated or trivialized when you say blah. Okay, obviously you're going to fill blah in with something else. But helping the person understand, where is this coming from? What specifically am I saying that is leading you to believe that I am invalidating your feelings? And it could be something as obvious as you're wrong, instead of I disagree. Semantics there. But if I tell somebody, you know what, I disagree with that position on something, then I've come up to that boundary, but I haven't crossed it. I haven't told them that they're wrong, even if I think they may be. That's not my place. I've come up to that boundary and I've said, well, I disagree. These are my thoughts on it. Another example, I feel anxious about sharing my thoughts with you because when I do, it feels like you do these things. So maybe somebody engages in a behavior, they dismiss your feelings, or they don't take them seriously, or they make a joke out of it, or whatever they do. But it's important to give them examples so they know what specifically it is they're doing, and they have the option to modify their behavior. And finally, my anxiety gets triggered when you raise your voice, because when I was growing up and my father would get angry, he would raise his voice and it would get ugly. That helps the person understand the projection. I recognize in the present that you are safe and you're raising your voice and you're not a threat to me. However, I'm letting you know that I start to feel threatened and defensive when you do that because it reminds me of those past traumas, and then deciding where to go from there. Other strategies. Find areas of agreement. Look for points that you can both agree on. this situation is dangerous. Okay, we both agree. We may disagree on how dangerous it is. We may disagree on how to address it, but we can agree that it's dangerous. Maybe the only thing you can agree on is this is not a topic that is probably good for us to discuss. Okay, that's fine. And sometimes there are no-go zones that are too triggering for people. And as much as we'd like to think that we can all listen without defensiveness, if somebody holds an opinion that is contrary to one of your deeply held values or beliefs, then it may not be a place that's safe to have in-depth discussions. Now, some people can have very logical debates, and that's great. Good on them. But not everybody can. And so sometimes you may, as they say, agree to disagree. Look for ways to collaborate instead of conflict. And I know that's not exactly the right English for that. But figuring out, how can we work together? What can I learn from you? What can I share with you? How can we collaborate in this situation to create a workable solution? If you're talking to a customer service person and you go up to them and you say, this doesn't work, I need a refund. And the customer service person says, do you have your receipt? And you say, no. And they say, well, you're out of luck. Okay. Well, they've set their boundary. They've set that line in the sand. But then you can respond with, let's collaborate. Okay. I got this. Yes, I lost my receipt. What can I do in order to try to get a refund? Can I talk to your manager? Can I contact the company? How is it that I might be able to rectify this situation? Instead of continuing to hammer that person and say, well, I bought it here. Why can't I get a refund? And the person just keeps saying, I can't do it. It's not within my ability. No matter how much you badger them, they ain't going to be able to change the outcome if they don't have that ability. So how can we work together? What is it? How can you help me arrive at the solution that I want? If you can't do it, then who can? Create win-wins. How is it that this can happen and everybody feels like they got something? And you may not feel like you got everything, but everybody feels like they got something. And creating win-wins can be really helpful. If, for example, you get stressed out when somebody that you're in a relationship with is regularly late, and you feel, when they're late, you feel like they're being disrespectful. And so they come in, and what happens? You're already defensive, and where have you been? So you start out being aggressive, which triggers their defensiveness, and it just goes downhill from there. Creating win-wins, instead of jumping all over their case as soon as they walk through their door, saying something to the effect of, when you are late and you don't call, I get worried and I feel like you don't respect my time. I recognize that sometimes things are unavoidable. It would help me feel more important or less disrespected or whatever if, when you're running late, you would send me a text. That's a win-win. Recognizing maybe the person's situation was unavoidable, but this is how you can help me feel less stressed, which ultimately will make the whole initial post-work interaction a whole lot more amenable. Pick your battles. I mentioned that before. Think. If you're going to say something, make sure first, it's not at the beginning of the mnemonic, but make sure whatever you're getting ready to say is necessary. Is this something somebody really needs to know? And if so, then go through the others. Is what you're saying completely truthful? Will it be helpful to them? How can you say it in a kind and inspirational way? And oh my gosh, brace yourself. Apologize when necessary. And this goes a long way to reducing defensive communications in relationships. When, even if you got defensive and you're like, oh, wow, I kind of overreacted to that one in retrospect. All right, apologize. I was wrong. When you got defensive, remember, that's an aggressive move. That's an aggressive stance. So that person probably felt vulnerable, probably felt unsafe, and may have gotten defensive in response. So it's important for somebody at some point along the way to say, you know what? I invaded your boundaries. I was too aggressive. I was whatever. I apologize. And then you can talk about why it happened. But apologizing goes a long way. So the person doesn't meet up with you the next time and go, all right, brace myself. I don't know what's coming again today, but I know that something's coming. Engage your executive control network. And I haven't talked about the ECN in a long time, but to summarize it, your default mode network, your DMN, is your autopilot. And your ECN, or your executive control network, is your thinking mind, your wise mind. When the amygdala, that part of your brain that's involved for interpreting things and fear processing, when it's triggered by a threat, it frequently strengthens its connections with the default mode network and results in default or habit responding. So each time you go to return something at customer service, if you've had a bad experience, then you go the next time and you expect a bad experience. So you kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy that strengthens that connection. So then from then on out, pretty much, you start expecting whenever I go to customer service, it's going to be ugly. And that's the default mode. That has nothing to do with this person at this place at this time. It has to do with every other customer service manager you've ever interacted with. The executive control network helps you focus on the present situation in the current context and choose a response that's more in line with what you want. What do you want? I want my request fulfilled. Okay. So what's the response? If somebody comes at me, when I used to work in customer service, if somebody came at me aggressively, my first response was to kind of stand my ground instead of figuring out, hey, how can I work with this person? I'm not saying it was a healthy response. I'm just telling you what it was. So it's important to think, what is it that you want out of this person? What is it that they can do to help you feel empowered and safe? And go into it with that notion. For example, walking up to a customer service person, and most people don't smile at them and ask them how their day's going before they start complaining. That goes a long way. Treat them as a human being. Oh my gosh. When you are getting ready to sit down with an employee and give them constructive feedback for their evaluation, for example. Okay. Well, it's important to think, what do you as the supervisor want? You want them to change their behavior some way. So it's important to help them feel empowered to be able to do that. Therefore, if you come at them with only all the things that they screwed up, they're going to be going, well, clearly I can't do anything right. If you start out by going, oh my gosh, you did such wonderful things this year. Let's look over some of your accomplishments. Now let's talk about some of these other things over here. Then you've started to help empower them and making sure to phrase it in a way that focuses on the behavior, not the person. You're not pulling your weight in the department. Well, that's vague. And you could argue that that's not behavioral or objective. Saying it's important for these reasons that you are on time for your shifts. I've noticed that over the past 6 months, you've been habitually 20, 30, 40 minutes late. And talking about why that's a problem. Not saying you suck as an employee, but talking about why it's a problem for the organization and what needs to happen. I'm not going to criticize you as a person. What's happening to the organization? We're paying overtime. People are getting frustrated, whatever. And then also asking, how can I help you make this change? So providing offers for support goes a long way when you're talking to somebody. If you're trying to get them to change a behavior, if you're providing some sort of feedback, even if you disagree on something, maybe you are working on a team together and at an engineering firm, and you're trying to solve a problem, and Sally thinks it should be done this way, and this is according to her training, and you think it should be done this way, and that's according to your training. You've been trained in two different ways. Okay. It doesn't mean either one of you is wrong. However, you've got to decide how you're going to do it. So what can you do to arrive at a workable resolution? Maybe you both educate each other about your perspectives, and then you can take the best parts out of everything. The Executive Control Network can help you learn new skills and alter your schema or your expectations so you feel safer and more empowered, which reduces the strength of that fear response and the HPA axis or the stress response. How can you do this? Well, one of the easiest ways is rehearsal or even empty chair. If you have difficulty having annual evaluation conversations with your supervisor, or if you are a clinician and you are in clinical supervision right now, every single one of those sessions can feel overwhelming to some. It's important to rehearse it and practice hearing without defensiveness. Review your own work, for example, and imagine, if I were a supervisor, these are the things that I would say. These are the things that I think could probably be improved, okay? And then imagine sitting in that evaluation and having them provide that feedback. Practice responding to that, hearing what they have to say. You can also rehearse it with somebody else and just sit down and go through a job interview or an annual evaluation or a customer service return or whatever, and rehearse it with someone else. And you may even have them act snitty or ugly to you, just so you're prepared, because it'll happen when somebody does act that way to you. So you know that you have the skills to respond by not becoming defensive. Identify and modify your schema. When you're talking to people and you start to feel defensive and you think, you sound just like my mom, my dad, my ex. Okay, recognizing that as your past influencing your present, and then use what I call beta testing. Breathe. Get grounded, whatever. G just didn't work for the mnemonic. Take a breath. Hold it for a second. Exhale. Evaluate the situation based on the facts in the current context. Think about what you want to have happen, or talk with the other person about what you want to have happen, and then take action. Defensiveness is a way we protect ourselves from hurt or rejection. Defensiveness, unfortunately, is an aggressive strategy which makes the other person also feel unsafe and disrespected, invalidated, attacked, whatever however that person perceives it. Creating safety for both people is essential to reduce defensiveness. In real life, and using cognitive rehearsal or that empty chair technique, you can learn new skills and really strengthen the connections in your executive control network. Think about when you were learning math as a child. When you were learning your times tables, oh my gosh, at least for me, it took a while. And it wasn't something that just came naturally to me. But after practicing them, day in and day out, like children do, that cognitive rehearsal, my executive control network developed the skill. So now when I think 9 times 7, I think 63. I don't have to stop and think about it. I don't think 9 times 7, oh crap, that's multiplication tables. I hate multiplication tables. No, it just goes straight from problem to solution. And that's a good thing. But you need to strengthen those connections that help you feel safe, empowered, knowledgeable, and able to handle what's being presented to you.